Hello everyone, Halcyon here. I have a very special video for you guys today. I'm going to share with you my tips and thoughts on how to play the famous Animenz UNRAVEL piano arrangement. If you don't know already, Animenz UNRAVEL cover is the most famous anime piano cover on YouTube. It has inspired so many people to try to learn this insanely difficult piece. So if you're one of them, I hope that the tips and tricks from this video can help you out. One more thing before we begin, I've been playing the piano for 17 years and I'm also classically trained, but still I'm not a piano teacher. This is just a commentary from my point of view, and I actually don't recommend learning this piece until you have enough experience playing the piano. Right, let's begin. This part is the first part of the piece, the introduction. Alright, so that is the introduction. Now I'm gonna play it slowly for you first. This part is actually one of the easier parts of this arrangement. The first 4 bars from here to here are actually very straightforward. And then now we go to the next 4 bars. So one thing to note is that the small notes here are played by the right hand. For the next 4 bars, here comes the first slightly difficult part, which is from here to here. Now, one thing to note about this part is that you have to bring out the main melody at the top. But at the same time, you're also playing these small notes here, right? You have to pay special attention to bring out the main melody above. And then the rest of it is just similar to the first part. There's actually not too much to talk about for this part because it's relatively easy. Starting from bar 16 here up to bar 23, it is one of the most difficult parts of this arrangement. Let's see how Animenz play it. I'm going to play it in slow motion this time to let you know how the fingers go. Okay, so that is much more slower, but hopefully you can hear how the notes go. Let's start with the first 3 bars here, the first line at the top. The difficult part about these 3 bars here is actually in the left hand. We have very fast repeated notes. So if you're just starting to learn this piece, for this part I suggest start slow first. Get the rhythm correctly and build up the speed little by little. Another alternative, instead of using just one finger to play the repeated notes, you can use alternating fingering, like 3-2, 3-2, 4-3, 4-3, or 2-1, 2-1. That's also another way to do it. Personally, I've tried both approaches, either using just one finger repeatedly or using two fingers to alternate each note. But personally, I find that both are about the same in terms of difficulty. And one thing to note, here it is marked subito forte. That means suddenly loud. So for the section before, you may want to like do a crescendo here. But if you do a crescendo here, then the subito forte here lost its meaning. So my suggestion to bring out this subito forte is to avoid doing any crescendo at the end of the last section and keep the end of the last section as soft as possible. And when you get to this part, it gets loud suddenly. For the next section, section A3 here, from bar 19 up to bar 23, this part is one of the most difficult parts of this arrangement because you have these extremely difficult octave jumps in the right hand. Personally, I think that if you use 1-5 here and 1-4 here, it helps a bit. But then for the next two jumps from D to G, you have 1-5 here, and you are also forced to use 1-5 here because you have an arpeggio going down, 1-5, 5-3-2-1 like that. So, and of course, make sure that to accent the top notes. There's no shortcut around it. You just have to practice to make sure that the muscle memory is correct. The second thing I want to talk about is actually the left hand syncopation here. So notice that the left hand is playing off beat. 1 and 2 and. If you play slow, then you can play correctly. But once you start to speed up, then it's easy to lose track of the rhythm. Make sure you still keep the syncopation, the rhythm, precise here. One more thing is that for this bar here, you can use the right hand to take the D. So this can belong to the right hand, like this. So that's it for this section. Let's move on. Here comes part B. Now, let's listen to Animenz play it. Let's focus on section B first, from bar 24 to bar 31. What do you do in these 8 bars? Notice that you have the main melody up top again. And then you have also some repeated chords in the middle. The trick to playing this part is actually figuring out which hand plays which notes. Because some of the chords here are actually quite tricky, I'm going to give you an example. Let's focus on the first 2 bars. For the first chord here, the right hand plays A, B flat, D, and B flat. Now it sounds like this. It is actually a very difficult chord to reach if you have a smaller hand like mine. So if you use the thumb to play the A, B flat, D, and then you can't reach the B flat here. So what I do is I use the left hand to help out. For the left hand, I play the A also. So the left hand plays up to the A. So now I can play the entire chord like this. So the left hand takes the A and the right hand takes the rest of the chord. And then you can just hold this with the pedal and then just use the left hand to play this one and this one. So that's what I mean by figuring out which hand plays which notes. The second bar is also similar, but this time the left hand cannot help out. Take a look at this chord. The right hand plays. It is a very difficult chord to reach. Once you play with the first 3 fingers, and then you just can't reach the D. The left hand this time plays like all the way down here. My trick is to use the thumb to play both the D and the E flat. I try to push the thumb into the corner of the black key and play the D at the same time. That's the only way that I can think of. And the rest of the section is actually quite similar. Here, again, you have the left hand taking this part, but the right hand taking the upper part here. And this is done by the right hand. So that's it for this section, just figuring out how the fingers go and assign the notes to each hand. Now, section C, from bar 32 to bar 35. There are three things that I can talk about. Now, the first thing is the left hand. Let's focus on the first bar. For the left hand, the fingering, what I use is like this. Yep, like that. Then the next two bars is actually exactly the same. So the second thing that I want to talk about is the pedaling. My suggestion for the pedaling is just hold until the end of the first beat here. It's actually cleaner. You can hear the notes clearly. And if you look closer, then you can see that it's also Animenz's intention here. For this bass note here, he used the quarter note. So it is like holding down the pedal until the end of the first beat. At the same time, by holding the pedal only until the end of the first beat and keeping the rest of it dry, then the right hand also sounds much more better and clearer. The third thing that I want to talk about is the right hand here. For the right hand here, imagine putting more pressure and putting more focus, more emphasis on the bottom four notes here, which is the main melody. The next two bars here and here are basically just a repeat of this bar, so there's nothing special. This is bar 36 to bar 33, which is the first half of the chorus. What is the most difficult part about this section here? The right hand is actually quite manageable because it is just chords. The more difficult part here is the left hand. Actually, I think it's better if I play the entire section in slow motion. First of all, you have the bass here, and then blah, 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 blah. For the first part, the jump, with enough practice and muscle memory, then you can get it done. But then for the arpeggio here, very easy to make it sound like a mess, you know. Like even when I play it, I just cut some corners and, you know, make it sound a bit messy. I would suggest that if you're practicing this section, just start slow, okay? Just bump. And then once you're more comfortable with it, you can build the speed up little by little. For the fingering, some people like to use 1, 2, 3, or I like to use 1, 2, 4. It's just personal preference. So you can use either 3 or 4 here. I like to use 4. 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 1, 5. And then the left hand repeats here, but just in a different position, different chord. First you have E flat, and then F, and then G, and then down to D minor. So once you have the first bar done, basically you have the entire section done also. So this is the first half of the chorus. Next, 6 bars from bars 44 to 49. Now I'm going to play it slowly to demonstrate the 6 bars. Now let's take a closer look. The fingering here, I like to use 5, 1, 2, 1, 5, 1, 2, 1. And then just repeat. So the difficult part about this arpeggio is you have to cross 2 octaves in a very short amount of time. And you have to pay attention to the accents notated here. Because we are using the 5th finger to play the bottom notes here, the 5th finger, unfortunately, is often the weakest finger of our hands. So you might need to apply more pressure, more force through your wrists, maybe to try your best to bring out the accents instead of you have a more rhythmic feel. Now for this bar, it's quite tricky. The left hand here, it's very, very tricky to play. I couldn't figure out a good solution for it, so what I do is 5, 1, 5, and then do a little jump here and go 5, 2, 1, 4, 2, 1, 2, 4, 1, 5, like that. This part is the hardest part. And then finally, right, now, this is the end of this section. Section E, from bars 50 to 57. This section is actually quite calm and easy to play. The only thing to notice is that you have to put some emphasis into the top notes and give the entire section a kind of a pulse. Especially for this melody here. This is especially more emphasized compared to the rest of the section. One final thing to note for this section is the fingering here. So here you can use 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And yep, that's it. Now, next one. This section is slightly difficult. Section F from bars 58 to bar 65. If you take a closer look, it is actually not that complicated. Once you have the fingering down, then this part just collapses. I'm gonna write out the fingering that I use for this part. And then the next one is actually quite similar. This is actually the same, but then here I use 4, 2, 3, 2. And then this part, the first half is the same. 4, 1, 2, 1. Right, that's it. From bar 58 to 61, from here to here, the left hand, just figure out the fingering that works for you, and then practice. The right hand is very simple. Now for the next part here, it is actually very similar to the part that we've seen before in the chorus. It's also something like that, but this time it is you have a chord in the middle here. So basically use the same fingering as the left hand in the chorus. And then of course you have the final accents here, which leads up to the climax of the piece, which we'll go to now. Take a look at this.
It looks like a roller coaster, you know, going up and down, up and down, up and down, like a roller coaster. And just by looking at this page, you're already scared. But it is not as difficult as you think. There are some tricks that you can think of in dealing with runs. Now, let's first hear how Animenz plays this part. It looks very, very intimidating. You have the arpeggios going up and then going down, going up, going down, up and down, up and down, and in lightning speed. Brrr. Once you get the trick, then it's much more easier to play. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's focus on the first line here, the first 2 bars. For runs like these, or arpeggios if you would like, the trick is to figure out the grouping of the notes. For the right hand, if you count the notes, you can see that it goes from D, G, A, B flat, and then it repeats, and then a little turn here, and repeat again and again. Now, so you can use the same fingering all the way up. The tricky part is to practice how to keep the arpeggio smooth. For the fingering here, what I like to do is I like to circle them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then actually a turn here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. This time we can use 1, 2, 3, 4. For this D here, we just use the 5 and then 1, 2, 3, 4. I make it sound like it's very easy to do, but I'm only like telling you my thought process and how you approach a run like this. The actual practice, of course, takes tons of time, but hopefully this gives you some idea of how I look at runs like these. At the same time, don't forget the left hand has to stay in tempo. Once you get the idea of grouping the notes together, now we can do the next part as another example. Now here, similarly, just first figure out the notes. And then once you play it, and then figure out the grouping, how the arpeggios go down. So we have a group of 5 here, 5 here, and for this one, I like to look at it as a 3, 4, and a 4, and a 2. Now, the fingering that I use for this one is 3, 5, 3, 2, 1, and then repeat, like this. For this part, it may not be the best fingering. Now, one thing to note about this entire section is that the importance of the accent, these accents here, you know, these here. Because if you listen to the original song, you can hear this falling pattern here, which is exactly what this is trying to play here. This one, and this one. So you have to make sure to accent these notes to bring out the melody. So you can listen to Animenz play again. So listen. Can you hear it? And here we go again. Like that. The accents are very, 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 very important, especially more important when you're playing like runs like these. You tend to forget about the rhythm and you tend to forget about everything. You just focus on getting the notes right. Make sure besides playing the notes, you have an idea of what you want it to sound like. You don't want to just play the notes correctly. You have to have a mental image of what you want it to sound like. One more thing to note is that some people like to use 4, 5, 4, 2, 1. But for me, I think it's easier to do the accents with the third finger. It's easier than 4, 5, 4. So I use the third finger personally. One more tip about doing runs like these. The accents, they are very important. So make sure that this is on the first beat, on the second beat, on the third beat. So even though you're doing runs, you have some freedom with the notes in between. But for these key notes, I think it's better to play them on time. The bottom 2 lines is a repeat of the top 2 lines. I'm going to write out the fingering for the second line as well. This part is exactly the same as the one above, so I'm not going to repeat that. And this one is also very similar to the above, but here I have Again, this is my personal preference. I don't know if you have a better way to play it. Actually, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1 is actually also okay. Just figure out which ones work better for you, and that's okay. Then it's repeat. Then we can move on to the next section. The right hand again. Bring out the melody at the top. You can actually see the beaming here. There's an extra beam above. For the left hand, it's also quite straightforward. It is basically arpeggios, figure out the fingering, and then you're good to go. It's actually not that difficult to play. For the first one, you can use... This is a repeat. Next one, I use 5, 2, 1, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1, and then this is a repeat. And for the next one, 5, 2, 1, 4, 5, 3, 2, 1, and then repeat. And the final one, 5, 2, 1, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1, and then repeat. Once you figure out the fingering, make sure that the right hand and the left hand plays in time. Next one. This part is quite scary. You can see the difficult part is this one, the arpeggios going down. To play it slowly, this is not a comfortable arpeggio to play because the E flat and the D is so close together and it's so fast. I think it's reasonable to miss 1 or 2 notes. You play the first 3 groups with your right hand and the last group with your left hand. Try your best to play the arpeggio even though you're going down very quickly. You have to make sure that it is not just fast without any structure. Imagine that there are quarter notes here. Make sure that this lines up with this one. Make sure that these are actually on time. This section is basically that. Bars 82 to bar 90. The first half from here to here is basically exactly the same as the previous section before, which is before the first chorus right here, section C. Except that now we have a G, E flat, F, G instead of G's all the way. And again, the pedaling, make sure that release them at the end of the first beat. Let's focus more on the next 3 bars from here to here. Let's take a look at where the main melody is, okay? The main melody is actually sandwiched in the middle. Like you could say this is like a freehand technique if you like. The most difficult part, you have to bring out the main melody. But at the top, you have this little decorative going on in the right hand, and in the left hand, besides the pedaling release here, if you are just starting to learn this section, forget about bringing out the main melody first. Try to play the notes first. Once you get the notes correct, then you can start to focus on bringing out the melody. Once you have the notes memorized and the muscle memory is strong enough, then you can forget about playing the correct notes and focus more on the melody. Okay? The fingering here, I think it's quite straightforward. I'm going to show it on stream. For the Next part. It looks quite similar to the things that we have seen before. Again, the right hand has the main melody, and at the same time there are some decorative notes played by the first and the second finger. And so you have to bring out the main melody again. And now we have arrived at something new actually. For the second part, we see the repeated notes. It's going to happen more often later. We can use alternative fingering, 1 2 1, 1 2 1 to play the repeated C's here. So like, once you can use alternative fingers for the repeated notes, then it's much more easier. The repeated notes actually come up again here, 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 and also here. Basically use the 1 2 1 fingering all the way through, and then you can solve the problem. For the final two bars, the left hand looks a bit complicated. I like to play 2 1 5, 2 1 5, and etc. And also here, I also use 2 1 5, and etc. Not a lot to talk about for this section, except that we see the repeated notes for the first time. And then the next section, it's slightly more difficult. You see there are even more repeated notes in the left hand. Now for me, I like to use 1 4 4 and then 4 1 1 to play the repeated notes. Some people like to use maybe like 1 3 4 and then 4 3 1. Everyone has a different take when playing repeated notes. I like to use 1 4 4 like this. The right hand is fortunately quite simple. That's it. Next section. This section, it's actually quite straightforward. There's not a lot to talk about, so I'm just gonna skip this because we've all seen this kind of pattern before. So the next section. Now I'm going to play it one time, but in slow motion, okay? What makes this section so difficult? Right away, you notice it's actually grouped like this. But then, besides the main chords, you have the repeated notes in the right hand. I mentioned before that playing repeated notes is much more easier when you can use alternative fingers, like 1 2 1. But here, it's quite difficult to use alternative fingering here, because first thing, you have to play this chord, which most people will use 2 3 5, unless you have like gorilla hands. You use the thumb to play the next note, and then the next chord, it's also 2 3 5, and you're forced to use a 1. So you have to hit this note twice with the thumb. You can imagine if you are playing at the normal tempo, this is going to be very, very, very difficult to do. My point of view is that this set here might be the most challenging part of this arrangement actually. For the next two sets of repeated notes, like starting here and here, you can actually use 1 2 1, which helps a bit. You have to repeat this for 2 more bars. By the time you go from here to here, your hands are already like destroyed. Definitely, this section is much more difficult than it looks, in my opinion, because it is just so tiring to play at this point. Right, the next part. This part is the famous left-hand jump part. The jumps are actually, in my opinion, not that difficult to hit once you have enough experience on the piano. So if you're learning this part, I suggest that start slow and try not to look at your hand when you're playing the jumps. Train the muscle memory, and then you get to know, like in your mind, where the keys go. You don't have to stare at it to know exactly where your hands need to be put. It's kind of like when you're learning how to drive a car. At the beginning, you may have to look at where the stick is and put your hand on it. But then, like after a while, you kind of know where things are, like without having to look at it on purpose. So let's move on to finally the last page. First part here. If you have survived up to this point, then I'm sure you can deal with these 3 lines by yourself. For the last line, the only thing that I can talk about is the run here. For me, I like to play this part with the right hand. So like this. Fingering that I use is for the left hand, and the right hand is just 2 1 2 3 2 1 2. And then you'll repeat one more time and get to the end. Let's go back and take a look at what we've done so far. First page is relatively straightforward. In this part, you have to bring out the main melody. That's it. And then here we have the repeated notes in the left hand, and also the octave jumps here. And here you have to allocate each note to which hand. Here, just fingering, and also the pedaling is also important. Make sure that it sounds clean. And then this one, practice the arpeggios. Here, try to make them as smooth as possible, and also do the accents. This part is quite straightforward. I'm just gonna skip it. This part, left hand fingering does all the job for you. Here, basically training the right hand runs and also making sure to do the accents. And this part is simple. This part, make sure to keep the key notes in time. You may miss 1 or 2, it's okay. Nobody's gonna blame you too badly for that. Here, mainly the difficult part is the second half. Get the notes right first, and then you can focus more on bringing out the melody. And here we have the repeated notes the first time. Just use alternative fingering, and that's done. And here also repeated notes. I used 1 4 4 4 1 1, but you can use another set of fingering if you like. This is simple. This is one of the hardest part. So repeated notes with the thumbs. And then here we have the left hand jumps. Practice and muscle memory does the job. And finally, the end. That's it. There are you can just go into the chorus, blum bum 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 bum, you know, and bum